Is there a word for people who aren't dyslexic? Lexic? I don't know. Probably not lexic, anyway. And I don't mean in conversation about dyslexia, where you might say, oh, there are dyslexic people and there are non-dyslexic people. I mean in ordinary discourse. Is there a word for people who aren't dyslexic? You see, the very fact that there isn't shows that there's a norm, a standard, and that standard is something that we dyslexics don't quite reach or live up to. This standard is something that we should live up to and we don't live up to, and we're therefore dyslexic. So the fact that there is a word for dyslexic seems to show that there's a standard that we should live up to and we don't. But the fact that there is no word for non-dyslexics, other than, non-dyslexics, shows that there is this normative, unspoken assumption that the rest of the world is quite normal and that the rest of the world does what they do. So there's a standard, and that standard isn't us. But what is the standard? Well, it's certainly not neurotypical, whatever that means, because there is no such thing as neurotypical. What is this typical? What's typicality in this case? Is there a particular standard of lexical ability that everybody else, or literate ability or literacy ability that everybody else should live up to that we don't? Because there isn't. Around the world, there's a massive difference in literacy abilities. And so you'll find that even many dyslexics are superior to other people in literacy ability. I mean, to be honest with you, I probably am. I couldn't spell until I was 16, 17, and I taught myself to spell using techniques that it turns out dyslexics are very good at. So I can spell fairly well. And, reading is a slow process, but I read. And I may actually be quite high relative to the world literacy standard. And yet I'm still dyslexic. And those who aren't are neurotypical? Typical? Typical of what? They're all different. Everyone's different. We're all varied. What is this neurotypical? Is it normative? Is it something that we should live up to somehow? I don't know. So the very fact is, the fact that we use this word shows that there's a normative standard that we should live up to but don't live up to. And yet actually this normative standard is unreal. It doesn't exist. And it labels us as negative. It labels us negatively against that standard, dyslexia. There's nothing that we call non-dyslexic people because there's nothing that describes them. In the same way, there's nothing that describes dyslexic people. We're all different. There are massive variations within dyslexia of working memory, of executive function, of phonological ability. And yet we're all labeled as this thing that is dyslexic. And by the way, whenever we do this, we other people. When we label them as dys, when we label people as different, we other them. We make it as though they are different and they should be looked upon differently. And this is actually a very difficult thing to do ethically, because othering people distances us from them. Othering people puts a distance between one group and another group. And the very act of calling somebody dyslexic, not only is it wrong in a way, because it assumes there's a standard and assumes that this standard is achieved by, by everybody else. And then it assumes that dyslexic people are all somehow the same, which we're not. Not only is there that, but it then others those who are dyslexic. It makes us seem different, and it makes us seem less. So one of the things which I think is interesting to do is ask people, what should we call those people who aren't dyslexic? Because we couldn't call them lexic, and we wouldn't call them neurotypical, because there is no typicality that they all share. And if we realize that there's no real label we can apply to those who aren't dyslexic, then what's this standard of lexical capability that the rest of us have failed to live up to? Why call us that? And in calling us that, what harm might it be doing?